Screen, we do have a question from Kansas. Go ahead. Unmute yourself and
Here I
ask.
am. In looking at the performances, I see that they are desire to be a static anchor point, and being able to be out on a tree limb at a distance away from the trunk could give you a lot of bounce. Would there be an advantage in a routine to have a vertical motion in your routine rather than a static anchor point?
I don't know. Usually we hang from static points, although the silk, you maybe have noticed, has some give itself. I don't know that you'd want to use a tree limb. You're saying like using the tree limb itself to get some bounce?
Oh yes, yes. You can get a lot of motion in a branch out away from the tree.
Yeah. I guess it would be up to the tree and up to the acrobat.
Okay.
Glenn, I was noticing that at the end of the video, the outdoor circus apparatuses at Gainesville Circus there were flexing a bit when the aerialist was doing their routine. Is that a normal amount of flexing on an apparatus? Is that typical of what you'd find in a gym too, or is that different?
In the gym, we usually hang from an I-beam, which is a steel beam, and there's not much give there at all. Usually, at least you don't want there to be any.
Okay.
The flex, that's an aluminum rigging, so it's a thinner walled rigging, so it does have a little bit of flex to take that, the weight when you do drops. But there's other riggings that are upright riggings, and well, they flex a little bit too. I mean, you don't want them to snap. You'd rather they flex just a little bit, but yeah. For the most part, we like a sturdy, steady place to rig from.
Yeah, arborists ascend lines to access the trees where they work in, and some prefer to use a little bit of bounce while they're ascending up, taking each step kind of and bouncing on that. Others consider it just to be kind of energy absorptive and therefore kind of like walking up a sand pile. So, you know, I don't know, that bears on what you guys do, but I guess maybe it's possible that that could be incorporated into the routine, but I don't know if that's reasonable or not.
When you work with others sometimes on what's called a crane bar, which is a bar, and there can sometimes be more than a girl hung from that. And yeah, you don't want to kind of climb at the same time, otherwise someone will get left behind. Like you said, you can use that bounce a little bit. But yeah, if someone had something rigged and the tree was springy, that could be interesting to play with.
Well, I'm pretty certain James can rig something that can give you a lot of bounce and safe too.
Really? Okay.
Who is this, by the way? I saw you're from Kansas.
Yeah, it's Dan House from Kansas City.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thanks for stopping by, Dan.
Nice to see you too.
Yeah.
So sorry to interrupt there. I do see a great question from John Greer in chat. I noticed a girth hitch holding the silk onto a figure 8 descender. Are there different types of tie-offs you typically use, or is this the primary setup?
Who are we asking? I didn't understand that.
That should be a question for Lynn. I think it's probably a tree person asking an aerialist question, but I'm not sure. The figure 8 that you have, Lynn, what do you call the attachment arrangement of the silks to the figure 8?
A safety 8. Okay, you're talking about that, I suppose.
When you're running the silk across it, I think that the questioner is asking, you know, they're referring to that as a girth hitch.
Oh, okay, that's where I was confused. We just call it a way you attach a silk to a safety 8. I don't know that there is an actual word.
If you pull on one side of it, Lynn, does it pass the silk through the figure 8?
No, it shouldn't. You don't want it to do that. Yeah, because it goes through itself, the extra time and back. Yeah. So is that a girth hitch or is it a different?
It's a girth hitch.
Yeah.
I wouldn't.
Right here.
I'd have to look at it again. I kind of feel like a girth hitch passes back across a rope, and I kind of feel like this is passing across a figure 8 instead. So I'd have to think about it. Dan, what do you think? Are you still there?
Yeah, the silk loop or bite goes through the large hole, then goes back around over the small hole. So each side of the silk is not going to have any motion if one's loaded more than the other.
Okay.
So you've worked with aerialists before?
I've been wanting to.
Good. Is there a school there in Kansas?
We can do that in Nebraska next year, maybe.
Oh, why do you say that?
Well, we're going to have another rendezvous each year.
Oh, okay. Yeah. Do you have a school there in Kansas? You're in Kansas City?
What was the question?
Do you have a circus school there?
The neighbor of mine has a trapeze school nearby me that I've been intrigued to go try, but have yet to get the time to go do it.
Yeah. There you go.
I would like to bring something up, even though it was answered in writing. I know this is a question that keeps coming over and over again, especially from aerialists, because they are concerned about the forces. Hope I'm not putting you on the spot there, John. You did explain and try to explain to Chris H about his concern about doubling the branch loading to 1,600 to 2,000 pounds. Would you like to explain that verbally? Maybe some other people were also thinking about that.
Yeah. It's almost one of those things that's better to appreciate than understand until you've really gone and looked at the diagrams on the internet and understood the physics. But the basic idea is that when you have a rope passing over a pulley, going straight up, passing over a pulley and coming straight back down, that and then that end on the straight back down side is attached to something like a tree trunk, and then the climber weights it on this side. It turns out that you apply the weight of the climber to both of these, and that gets directed up at the rigging point at the top in the form of twice the weight of the climber. And you know that most people, when they first come across that bit of knowledge, protest a little bit, and that's reasonable to protest. But it is important to appreciate that physicists agree that that's the case. So any installation that we do, if it's passing over an anchor point where there's little or no friction, such as a pulley that's rolling at the top, or a pair of rings that has a very low coefficient of friction, that's a 2-to-1 force magnifier. If the climber weighs 200 pounds and the line is tied off to the tree, that means they're applying 400 pounds to the anchor point. And if they shock load the system during a drop, if an aerialist shock loads it during a drop, they are potentially doubling the force of the shock load by having an installation like that. If you have a cinched canopy tie, where instead of passing over the pulley system and being tied down here, the tie actually occurs up here at the top. And this was illustrated in the short clip in the video, and we didn't really focus on it, where I was looking at trees with slippery bark. That was actually a cinched canopy tie, and those don't have that 2-to-1 force magnifier. So if you want to, you can do a cinched canopy tie as an alternative. It's just, we did that, Lynn, I think a little bit, didn't we? And there was some awkwardness about it.
Oh, when we tried to tie it off to the other side?
Yeah, we did a cinched canopy tie where we could retrieve it with the tail there.
Yeah.
It was hard to get the apparatus elevated up into the tree, I think, is what we learned.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
There's
think
probably
maybe
a way for thought on that. One of the objectives of this seminar was to keep it simple. So everything that I've done, and I think Lynn too, has been with the purpose of trying to enable aerialists to make trees more approachable and rigging them more approachable for aerialists.
And I like the idea that we have someone to go to, just like we have certified riggers that'll rig for us. It's nice to know there's certified arborists that we could ask for advice.
Yeah, and specifically the tree risk assessors are really good ones for this application.
Would the arborist question, or excuse me, would the aerialist question be more about how strong is the anchor point rather than the dynamics of how it's loaded?
There's a lot of talk, obviously, in the aerial community of silks and the dynamic forces that happen when people do drops and things. It's much more than we realize. I mean, aerialists are usually about, barely 100 pounds sometimes. I mean, you start saying, oh, it's 1,200 pounds. They're going, wait a minute, oh, wait. Yeah, so that's why we talk a lot about the dynamic forces.
Well, the branch that you are all hanging on could probably hang everybody you know in a Buick and hang it from a rope, because that branch isn't going to go anywhere.
Is that right?
We do have a couple more questions in the question box from John Greer and Chris H. And if you'd like, I have unmuted you from my side. You can go ahead and unmute and ask your own question if you would like.
Yeah, testing. I don't know if my mic works.
Sounds great, John. Go ahead.
Okay, good. Well, I was just kind of sharing that I've made a homemade hammock out of that silky material using anchor hitches on carabiners. And it turns out that that's the most comfortable hammock I own compared to commercial hammocks that I've purchased. So I just wanted to share that bit of information. But yeah, the anchor hitch is also a real good tie-off method for that type of fabric, at least from my experience.
Great.
We have two aerialists that would like to ask questions. I don't know if they would like to unmute so they can ask. One is Chris H. and the other one is Crystal.
Hey, this is Chris. Can you hear me?
Yes?
Yes, Chris.
Hey, so I guess I've done a little bit of aerial rigging off of trees. I was at the Rendezvous last year. And typically I'm trying to do, because I don't have monster live oak trees that can hold a Buick, as Dan mentioned, but I do have some taller oak trees that are reasonably tall to kind of set, a high primary suspension point and then try to do like some sort of redirect to get me out from the trunk, because all the lower branches are maybe, 4 or 5 inch diameter, but I don't want to hang off of them 8-10 feet away from the trunk. So I've kind of gotten away with trying to drop a redirect through just like a fork in the branch, which kind of minimizes the vertical loading on the branch while still gives me a little bit of room to work with and potentially won't drop me on my head and kill me if I were to do something wrong. But do you know of any techniques to kind of reduce the friction on these points without having to just climb and set everything? Because it does kind of become a bear if you're like, I'm going to spend 3 hours climbing in a tree to set an aerial rig for an hour.
Initially, Chris, I'm sure there's different ways to solve that problem, but the one that comes to my mind is to terminate that current line that you have at the fork on the low limb, and thereby use it as a support line to support that low limb, and then attach a second line to the same limb, and make both of them remotely retrievable. It would probably take a little bit of thought on how to approach that. The low limbs, it almost sounded like some of those low limbs were a little bit smaller than some of the other limbs in the tree. And sometimes that can happen when there's excessive shading that doesn't allow the branches to reach the side of the tree and get access to sunlight out there. And those low limbs, I don't know what your background is, but some of those low limbs can be a little bit tenuous in their capacity to hold weight at that size. Whereas limbs that are the same size up higher in the canopy have, a bit better angle, so there's less side loading on them, and they tend to have a bit more vigor too. They're actually a little oxen enhanced, so they tend to be a little bit better to, support your weight. You're on the right track by trying to mitigate that circumstance that you've got. Any thoughts on what I've said, or further on what you said?
I hadn't thought of the idea of the first one where you basically said, tie the lower limb back to the primary point up at the top of the canopy, as a way to kind of move some of that force without having to have friction in the system. So I'm kind of curious to try that, because I think I've seen that done before, where you say, okay, this is the limb that I want to hang off of, and then you say, okay, I want to rig in such a way that I support the load on that lower limb, so I'm not pulling it down. It's just like positional more than. I think that actually gives me a good suggestion for something that I'll check out, because I was trying to think of like, how do I put a friction saver midline on some lower limb, but 2 lines makes sense.
Yeah. The other thing is, with those smaller branches, sometimes they have thinner bark that can be damaged by the rope passing over it. So if you can fix the ropes to the branch with, cinching the branch with those 2 ropes, instead of having them just redirected across it and able to slip, maybe that would be better too. What kind of tree is it? Do you know?
It's a willow oak.
So that's very similar to our laurel oaks, like the one that we had in the video. That was our, slippery bark tree. And it seems, in my experience anyway, it seems like those can be fairly thin barked and slippery in small diameter wood.
I've got a question for Chris. Are you familiar about sleeving over the rope with a hose or a piece of conduit or a leather sleeve used in the industry to act as a friction point at the point where the small limb is touching your anchor line?
I do. I actually have 2 of yours. The issue is that the redirect's mostly vertical, and if you're swinging, it'll pop free and slide down at you.
Slide down? Okay, you can put a stopper knot right below the rope sleeve and it will stay in place at the spot.
I'm hanging on the rope, so it would cinch down pretty hard.
Okay. That'd be a good workshop to have sometime in person.
Yeah, for sure.
Chris, just to chime in, a lot of arborists are using rope bridges on their harness these days with stopper knots. And it is possible to get those stopper knots undone, even though they've been excessively loaded with the arborist's weight.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, good point. All right, cool. Thank you, guys.
Speaking of weight and breaking points, there is a question. Is a lycra rated for a breaking point?
Yes, that's what I was just looking up while I was listening. There are people that have done all the breaking tests and things. A man named Ludwig, I'm just looking, I know he's on the Safety and Aerial Arts site on Facebook. It's a private group, but you can answer some questions and get into it. And they have, he's done a lot of research and breaking points and things with different types of lycra, different types of fabrics. Yeah, I can send you a link to that page. I'm gonna put that here.
Can you put that in the chat?
Yep, that's us. Yeah, there are people that are certified, but I don't know, IATSE? It's more of a stage certification as far as riggers. But I did answer someone that we use, Scott Osgood. He's a rigger and he's done all kinds of huge shows and things. He's very knowledgeable about all the forces and things and all the math involved.
There's another question from Crystal. I don't know if she's still with us. Crystal, would you like to ask your question verbally, or should I read it? I don't hear Crystal. Crystal wanted to know if you have tried any pulley systems that share weight sharing between aerialists, which I know we didn't try the time we were filming. I'm wondering if weight sharing between aerialists could be compared to some of the arborist work that you do, John. It's a lot of pulleys and rigging for holding branches at the same time when you're cutting them.
Can you restate that question? I was responding to someone via text question, Nadia.
Okay. It says, I'm interested if you have tried any pulley systems that share weight sharing between aerialists.
Oh, you know, I haven't, because I'm not an aerialist. I think this is a question for Lynn. Lynn, do you think?
Oh, we haven't. Yeah, I haven't done any pulley system kinds of things really.
It almost sounds like a counterweight system, and we do have
I think that's what she's talking.
Eric. Oh, I'm forgetting his last name. Whipple. Eric Whipple has a rescue system for rescuing climbers that are on a spar where there's no branches left during a removal. And that actually uses a counterweight system for the rescuer and the climber who's needing to be rescued. So we have that kind of circumstance in our boriculture, hopefully very infrequently. I don't know. It seems like, you know, if you have a person that's slightly bigger on one end and slightly smaller on the other, you might get into trouble really quickly.
Well, is that everybody? So have many of the arborists had some communication with aerialists in their towns? Can I get a raise of hands? Yes. Oh, there's another question. Steve Santos, that's the person I was trying to think of the name. Thank you, Missy. Thank you, Missy. Can everybody see that question? If people are looking for information about brake testing, look for Steve Santos.
Yeah, they can't see it that way, but is there a website or something for Steve Santos as well?
Probably. I think he's part of that Facebook group as well that I put in there. But yeah.
It would be easy to send something to Richard Mumford and have him put on his dynamic tester, and you can find out how many thousands of pounds that stuff will break at and videotape it.
You guys like breaking things, don't you?
That gives you a good confidence level when you see it. You know, you could pull a battleship with it.
I don't know. As an aerialist, I never wanted to break any of the ropes. I just wanted to climb them.
Well, it looks like we have answered.
Silence.
Yeah, we have answered the questions, and some people are starting to drop off. So I'm going to see that as a sign that you guys did a good job at explaining everything.
I'm sure there's still a lot of unanswered questions, but I think it's great that everybody wants to climb trees and do it safely.
Yeah, I really enjoyed the interdisciplinary interaction too, Lynn. So thank you. A lot of arborists like to kind of rub elbows with sailors, and it's neat to see another discipline kind of joining the ranks from our perspective, and us joining yours too. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. And thank you, Nadia, for bringing us all together.
All right. Oh, you have one more question, Lynn, before you go.
Where am I? I'm lost.
Lynn, what is your vision with regards to tree dancing?
Oh, you know what's funny? I had forgotten, but okay, when I was 8 years old, on my birthday, I was climbing a tree, and it was a cherry tree. You guys might, and so I thought, oh, I'm just gonna be like Tarzan and swing from one limb to the other. And I fell and broke my wrist on my birthday. But when I went to the hospital and saw the doctor, and I said, oh, hi, Dr. Harrison, I fell out of your tree. So he took really good care of me. He was the neighbor whose tree I fell out of. But then when I was in college and studied dance, I did a film about trees. So I guess I have an affinity for trees.
Looks like Mr. Gennaro Machiavello is raising his hand.
Oh.
He has a question.
Hi. Where are you? Hello?
Can you unmute yourself?
If you could unmute yourself, you are allowed to talk.
Oh. Or maybe he's just applauding.
Oh, mistake. No, sorry, it was a mistake, he says.
Okay.
There we go.
All right. Well, looks like we're done.
Oh, so yeah, John, now I saw your question.
Mhm.
I have a lot of visions about tree dancing. Mostly I want to keep them from getting cut down. So that's my vision.
Good job, all.
Thank you.
Thank you everybody for attending, and it was really enjoyable.
And thanks again, Tamala, for making this happen.
Well,
Yes.
thank you for the great information in the video, which I did put a link to in the chat so you can rewatch it without any of that shenanigans that happened in the middle there. And this will also be available for replay, the Zoom production. Find us later on the Tree Rendezvous 2020 page or the Tree XP group. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Hey, go forth and be in trees.